Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about literature and the arts. I am Itto Outini.
And I'm Mekiya Outini, and today we're reading and discussing 3 of our stories, all centering on immigrants, expats, foreigners, and other displaced persons, and also on white guys. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our free newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities. To support the podcast, you can make a one-time donation through our website or purchase a subscription to our blog where you'll find more premium content and resources at thedatekeepers.com. Thank you for being a part of our community. This first story is titled Layla Enabled. It was originally published in the Harpy Hybrid Review. I always call it the Happy Harpy Review, I think because they're not actually a hybrid publisher and I don't like to associate the word hybrid with them, but they're actually called the Harpy Hybrid Review, and here goes. Well, said the girl in azure chiffon, the chandelier's homuncular reflections dancing in her eyes, have you had it enlarged? Her rising pitch caught Timothy like an uppercut beneath the chin. His insides did cartwheels, the buffet tables tumbled and swooped like amusement park rides, sweat squirted from his clenching palms. Her beauty was more striking now without the lag, the grainy undersaturation, and her English was smoother as her calves, as if it, too, had undergone a strict regime of waxing. Her presence here was an anachronistic shattering. His reality lay in pieces on the floor. Have I, he echoed, casting about for firmer ground, have I? Layla's eyes dipped downward, rose again like swans. All he could think to say was, why? You said you wanted to, she said, her voice a feather on the wind. You said you were working 3 jobs. I'm a hard worker, he agreed. I work hard. You even showed us. She let loose a tinkling, glass-breaking laugh. 3 times you showed us. I must have had too much to drink, he said. I must have been really out of it, really tired. I work really hard. And we thought, why is he showing it to us? She went on. Is he hoping we'll say that it's good as it is? It's up to you, you know. Why are you here? To support the cause, of course. She flashed him a pearly-toothed grin. To make the world accessible, to save the blind. No, he said, I mean, here, in America. Why are you here in America? Oh, I didn't think I'd be meeting the Border Patrol. Then, seeing the mortification on his face, the shame, just teasing, I'm here as a student, I'm doing law. I'm volunteering, said Timothy. I work 3 jobs, and in between, I volunteer. Right now, I'm volunteering. I don't work here, I just volunteer. But why not get a 4th job if you've got the time? You'll get it done a lot sooner that way, if you're still wanting to, I mean. I like giving back, said Timothy. I like having a positive impact, you know, on the community. Do you still call girls every night, asked Layla, to help them with their English? No, he lied. You're too busy saving the deaf and the blind? That guy who was talking a minute ago, said Timothy, swelling with pride, on the stage, I'm the one who brought him. I'm his chaperone. That guy whose face looks like an elephant, you mean? Don't say that, said Timothy. That's really rude. He's got an amazing story, you know. An amazing story. I'm the one who brought him here. I'm his driver. I'm the one who's enabling him. You're still the same, aren't you? Layla giggled. You still talk the same. Well, yeah, I always have. I didn't have to learn. No, she said, I don't mean your English. I mean, you still say enabler and enabling like they're good things. When I talked to my American teachers, they said it's a bad thing, enabling. It is a good thing, said Timothy. It means, like, making someone more able, enabling, like how I enabled you by helping with your English, and now you're here studying law. I don't think you helped me with my English, really, said Layla. Actually, I had to relearn lots of things. I had to stop saying advocate for everything. I had to stop saying empowering. My friends at the American Language Center were always making fun of me, saying, Layla, you're not enhancing your salad's resilience through strategic capacity building. You're just adding onions. I never said anything like that, Timothy mumbled, about salad. Amal and Fatim Zahra, Layla went on, the other girls you met, remember? They were the only ones who ever got what I was saying. Oh, good. Timothy, this is Nathan. The man who'd materialized beside Layla was chiseled and blonde, dressed in a navy blue blazer and a long black and white speckled tie. Encircling her with his arm, he cast a curious glance down at Timothy, as if peering at something he'd just turned up beneath a stone. Hello, said Timothy, not extending a hand. I'm doing an internship with Nathan, explained Layla, beaming. With his firm, I mean. He's the reason I'm here. Leaning closer, she whispered, "We have a public-private partnership." Well, Nathan's smile might as well have been painted on. "Shall we?" "Yes," said Layla, liltingly. "We shall." When she moved, not away from Timothy, but toward him, he thought she was about to put her arms around him, maybe even kiss him on the cheek. Instead, she patted him lightly on the shoulder. "The world," she said, her eyes flickering almost imperceptibly downward, "is so small." Timothy's esophagus tightened, and his straitjacket button-down seemed to be shrinking, constricting, and his eyes rolled about on the floor like lost grapes beneath hard-bottomed shoes, and his dry tongue crawled over his teeth as if searching for oases in all the wrong places. "So small," he agreed.
For those of you who don't know, I am originally from Morocco. When I was in Morocco, in my third year at the university, I lived in a few dorms, I think 3. And during my time living in the dorms, everyone wanted to learn English. What I mean by everyone is the girls who were living in the dorms. And so we spent a lot of time trying to find American guys or whatever, like someone who speaks English, and dating them online. We used Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, and we talked with these guys all night. We spent our night sending them voice messages, making up our names and things like that. So that's how I met Timothy. His real name, by the way, is not Timothy. We changed the name. And he got so drunk every night. And so a few years later, I came to the US on a Fulbright in 2017. And I totally forgot about that experience. You know, it was not something that I was thinking about. My English was good. I was studying in the US. And I wasn't using a lot of social media. Even now, I only use LinkedIn. So one day, I saw the name a second degree. And for those of you who don't use LinkedIn, so first degree are people you're connected with, and second degree means that someone you know knows that person. So I reached out to my first degree, like, "Hey, do you know Timothy?" And the person says, "Oh, yeah, what a wonderful human being. He changes lives. If there are many people like Timothy, the world would be a better place." And I laughed so hard, thinking, wow, if you know what I know about Timothy, I don't think you would think that the world needs more Timothys. I didn't meet him at a conference, but he goes to conferences and all of that. The way he talks, everything about Timothy is based on, again, a real person's way of talking and way of being.
Yeah, and this was a fun one to work on for a bunch of reasons. This is our most compact story at this point. It's about like 800, under 900 words. And when you're working in such short form, you have to think about the language that you're using and get as much out of each word as you can. One of the first readers that we showed this story to commented on the verbiage in the first sentence and was like, "Why did you have to use the word homuncular? That's like a word that I didn't even know, and a lot of people won't know that word." So that got us thinking and talking about how you can do a lot with a single word. In that case, Timothy feels small. And of course, the word homuncular means a small being. It's an adjective form of the word homunculus. But it also confronts the reader with that feeling of smallness because a lot of readers may not know the word. A lot of readers may not have encountered it before. And when you encounter a new vocabulary word, even though this is kind of a silly reaction, a lot of us are conditioned to be like, "Oh, I feel stupid. I don't know this." And that's the position that Timothy finds himself in right off the bat with Layla, who he never expected to meet in person. Do you want to talk a little bit about the NGO language?
I mean, it's right there in the story. Like when we were
But like, that's not just Timothy who talks that way. That's a whole subculture.
Yes. I mean, the guys who were dating us back in Morocco on WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, all of them speak like that, which is really interesting. And I think it's people who are trying to or pretending that they are helping other people, saving other people, but they're not actually focused on themselves. And I personally believe that we cannot help others if we are not helping ourselves, loving ourselves, valuing ourselves, and things like that. So if you try to numb your pain by pretending to help other people, then you might not.
We're trying to use language in a way that is inverse to the NGO language, the type of language that the Timothys of the world use, because you have a lot of words that don't mean anything, that don't convey any substance, that can be as easily applied to a salad as they can to an international organization's operations. They project a certain image, of efficacy and of change making. But when you drill down and you analyze the words and you analyze their meaning, you find nothing. You find that they're empty. We hope that in fiction and in literature generally, you'll have the opposite experience. The more you look at the words, the more layers of meaning you'll find. Of course, not everyone has that experience. Some people have difficulty reading between the lines. I remember we shopped this story around to a few magazines before Heartbeat Hybrid picked it up. And one of the magazines, I'm glad we didn't end up with them because they sent, I guess it was a very nice rejection because most magazines don't tell you why they're rejecting a story. And these folks did. And they said one of their big problems with the story is that they never found out what it was that was supposed to be enlarged. So we decided this is probably not a good fit. Thanks anyway. We're glad you didn't take it because that would have been a lot more awkward if we had to decline the offer. This one is called Richard and Richard, and it was originally published in Across the Margin. One spring morning, the revelation Richard had been dreading for years finally came. The day was mild, suffused with the odors of hyacinth and petrol fumes, and the day was scentless, blustery, and cold. Richard was grading papers in his office at the American University of Beirut, and Richard was delivering a lecture in Cloth Hall Court, Leeds. The revelation, achieved as it happened by Richard's colleague, Dr. Abdullah Khalil, was that there were two Richard Billingses. "Hello, excuse me." Abdullah rapped on the office door as if scolding it for something. He wore an overlarge suit, which billowed about his brittle bones, a wafting seahorse of a man. Looking at him, Richard had to fend off the impression of a disembodied skull and spinal column floating about disconsolately in search of warmth and shelter. Richard had already finished scribbling A's on all his students' papers, but the interruption came as he was going through them for a second time, making sure that all the A's were the same size, lest they should arouse petty jealousies, and adorning each of them with intricate serifs. He always handed back papers that looked as if they'd fallen into the hands of medieval rubricators. "Perhaps you can help me make sense of something I've discovered," said Abdullah, wafting over to the visitor's chair and settling onto its surface like a feather abandoned by the breeze. "It's rather peculiar." From his suit, he withdrew a sheaf of printed papers. Richard could easily imagine whole libraries concealed within that suit, along with his skeletal colleague. "I received this from a friend," said Abdullah, laying the first of the papers on the desk, "a professor in England." Never having managed to get himself to Europe, Abdullah was palpably pleased to count among his correspondents a professor in England. Richard examined the printout. It was a conference itinerary. Halfway down the list of speakers, circled, was his name. "Then I found this," Abdullah went on, "and also this." Side by side, he laid the CVs, Richard Billings and Richard Billings. Richard didn't have to examine them. He'd updated his just last week, copying and pasting the most recent accomplishments of Richard Billings before clicking upload. Nothing about the American University of Beirut had been copied or pasted. "Then I thought there must be some mistake," Abdullah went on, "so I asked my friend to confirm that you were really there in England. He said he'd attended an event with you just last night, and that you were scheduled to speak again this morning." He laid his next two printouts on the desk, the grainy, black and white faces of the two Richard Billingses. Unlike the CVs, they were not identical. "I asked him which of these two men is the world-renowned professor of rhetoric and composition," he said, "and he told me that it is most certainly not the one with the beard. He has met you many times, Richard, and you have never had a beard." Richard's fingers fled like frightened birds into the silky salt and pepper tufts that blossomed from his chin. "It seems to me," said Abdullah, "that our dean might like to know that his most esteemed professor of rhetoric and composition is in possession of a beard to which he has no right." "You know, Abdullah," said Richard weakly, "it's quite a common name." "That may be," said Abdullah, "but there's no record of any other Richard Billings with your sterling credentials. I've searched, you see. There's an American baseball player. There was an editor with Lifestyle magazine. There's a financier. Yet there's only one professor of rhetoric and composition, and he teaches at the University of Canterbury, not here in Beirut, and he does not have a beard. It seems to me, Richard, that the dean would like to know that the significant salary you've managed to squeeze from him has been predicated all along on a misunderstanding." "Please, Abdullah." Lurching forward, Richard seized his colleague's hand. "You mustn't do this. Without my career, I've got nothing. No family, no place in the world. Understand, I'm at your mercy." "You're at the mercy of the truth," said Abdullah, fastidiously disentangling his fingers. "Nothing more." That night, Richard tossed and turned. He kicked and kicked until his sweaty sheets were gone, then retrieved them from the floor and wrapped them tightly around himself until he felt that he was suffocating. The restlessness of Beirut's midnights hadn't bothered him in years, but suddenly every car horn jarred him, bringing cold sweats to the pebbled surface of his skin. He thought of who he'd been 8 years before, when he'd arrived in Lebanon, a middle school dropout from Jacksonville, Florida, unemployed and unemployable, addicted to everything, committed to nothing, dissolute, pretentious, lovelorn and insatiable, with degrees only from YouTube, where white men in barong Tagalogs and dishtashas had assured him that white men could make it abroad. That good-for-nothing hovered in the darkness above him, with his glittering septum piercing and his leering eyes. Hours later, Richard rose in the gray light of morning, insensate to the orange notes on the crisp spring air. He splashed cold water on his face. He donned a suit. He went downstairs and hailed a cab. On the way to campus, he remembered with a jolt his meeting with the dean, who wanted to discuss his students' grades. He nearly collapsed stepping out of the cab. His knees trembled gelatinously on his way up the stairs. He'd eaten little since the previous afternoon, digested nothing. His stomach and intestines writhed like headless worms. The graded papers rustled in his trembling hands as he crept through the halls. He took a deep breath when he reached the dean's door, but found no room in his deflated lungs. He choked and spluttered as if he were drowning. The dean was a heavy-set man who smiled placidly at everyone and everything, even when he was furious. He smiled placidly at Richard. "Come in." Richard sat in the hard metal visitor's chair. "Your students," said the dean. "They're doing well." "Yes, sir." "All of them?" "All of them, sir." Richard placed the papers gingerly on the desk between them. He straightened their edges. He made sure that the A on top was plainly visible. He smiled weakly. "What you're saying," said the dean, "is that each and every last one of your students is most certainly on track to receive an A?" "That's right, sir." "Just to confirm," the dean fluttered his bench brush-like eyebrows, "there's not a single student under your supervision who may be at risk of receiving, say, an A minus?" "Certainly not, sir. And certainly not a B, I presume, or, God forbid, a C?" "Of course not." To Richard's horror, a bright giggle leapt from his mouth and flew about the room like a bird. "Never a C, sir." "You're certain?" "Oh, yes," said Richard. "More than certain." "Well." Smiling placidly, the dean reached across the desk and gave Richard's shoulder an avuncular squeeze. He looked him dead in the eye. "You're all right, then."
So always Mekiya and I make fun of our names, and I personally get really frustrated when people ask me, how do you pronounce your name? And I'm like, I don't even know, because it's so rare that I don't even know what my name is supposed to sound like.
And is pronounced differently in different languages.
That too, but I don't even know which language is the right one. Because again, even in Morocco, it was a rare name because it's an old Berber name, which is not common. Even back in Morocco, I remember when I was working at a national radio station, and one time I said, my name is Itto Outini on air, and people were really frustrated. They thought I was just making up a name, and that was not my real name. So we always joke about our names, how unique they are. And no one who is less famous or more famous has a name like ours. And of course, I am a person who strongly believes in hard work. And I have never thought of one day stealing credentials like what Richard did. In 2024, I received a WhatsApp message from my friend about a professor, again, in Richard and Richard, we changed the names and the countries, but a university that is well respected. They found out that one of their professors is actually a fraud.
And it was the same deal, right? Like he'd stolen the name and credentials of a real person. Well,
Yes.
the thing was he had the same name. Like he didn't
Yes.
have to steal the name.
He just stole the credentials.
And that's the same as the backstory for our character.
Yeah. So it's a story that makes you think a lot about what you earn versus what you just get. As much as it's good for Richard to be Richard and steal someone's credentials and use them. And
I think it was only the fact that the media started to cover it that caused him to experience any repercussions, right?
well, I mean, with the real guy, the university didn't know.
Or they say they didn't know.
Or they, yeah.
We're in the story, we're kind of exploring the possibility that maybe the administration knows, and as long as no one else knows, they're happy.
Well, but also like by the end of the story, you see that the dean of the school is like, okay, as long as you're giving grades, which I am conflicted on that one because if I have a lot of kids, a lot of parents pay me for their kids to go there, I might just give them grades. I think we all enable these crazy things to go on and on and on. But if we all come together as human beings to be like, hey, if you work hard and you earn a C or a D, but you've worked hard, you should be acknowledged for that in a way, like celebrated or whatever. But because of the way we as humans want to show off, we care more about what the outside world thinks about us. But someone like Richard, who lives under a fake identity, I don't think they live a happy and comfortable life. We all, at a certain moment of our lives, lied. I don't think I've ever met a person who has never lied. And if someone tells me they've never lied, that itself is a lie. But we all have that feeling of discomfort when we lie. And if you know that you are faking things, I don't think it's a life that anyone wants to live. I personally don't want to.
That's a good segue to our next story. This one is titled The Reanimation of Hippocrates. It was originally published in the Lincoln Review. My wife had packed up everything and moved with the children to the new house in Dallas, but I still had a month of residency left in Lubbock and didn't feel like springing for a room, so I did the obvious thing and moved into the hospital. My shifts were 12 hours anyway, and 2 days a week I was on call for 24, so I calculated, correctly as it turned out, that if I kept a low profile and discharged my duties conscientiously, nobody would notice my failure to leave. For the rest of the month, whenever I wasn't on duty, I would find an unused room and camp there. I've never been much of a sleeper, and with the bright lights and the ever-present possibility of crisis, rest remained elusive, but this afforded me plenty of time to myself, a precious commodity which, since I had started my family 5 years ago, has been in rather short supply. The year before, my cousin, in whose presence I'd undoubtedly grumbled about not ever having time to read, had given me a Kindle. It was compact and portable, the perfect companion for a reader as harried as me, but somehow I'd never managed to develop any fondness for the thing. Call me old-fashioned, but I'm partial to print. Returning from the airport after putting my wife and children on the plane, I stopped by a used bookstore and purchased a box set of Agatha Christie novels. The paperbacks were thin enough for me to carry 1 or 2 around the hospital, tucked surreptitiously into my scrubs, while the rest of the box set remained in the car. This was a bit of a throwback for me. Since boyhood, I'd nursed dreams of becoming a detective, half-baked, infantile, primarily aesthetic in nature, not well thought out at all, but to this day, there's still a streak of the forensic in me. Unlike my colleagues, I labor under no illusions concerning the role of the physician. Only one entity in the universe is capable of healing, and that is the afflicted body, which is why the verb to heal is both transitive and intransitive. What the afflicted body isn't always capable of is diagnosis, and because a clear-eyed assessment of facts is often necessary to promote the suspension of habits and the adoption of appropriate catalysts for healing, my profession resolutely persists. Not uncommon among my colleagues is the feeling that this view of medicine constitutes a willful self-demotion. In response, I can only point out that most modern patients are suffering not from a shortage of medicine, but from a shortage of understanding. Too few comprehend that a few simple lifestyle changes, limiting their intake of ultra-processed foods, for instance, and investing in harmonious relationships, and getting a good night's sleep once in a while, and yes, I realize that I'm not the best example, but this doesn't make me wrong, would abolish the bulk of their chronic conditions without recourse to pharmaceuticals or surgical interventions. But I digress. I digress because, like just about everyone, I feel better when pointing the finger of blame at others when I could just as easily, and perhaps more profitably, point it at myself. But, then again, perhaps there is no profit even in self-criticism, at least in cases where the deep, as opposed to the proximal, cause of our suffering lies so far beyond our control. Like my patients, I exist in relation to the insurance payments, the mortgage, the student loans, the gas, utility, and grocery bills, debts that must be paid whatever the cost to the body and soul. Rarely do I speak my mind about these matters, in part because to propose such impractical cures to my beleaguered patients would only insult them, and in part because whichever recommendations do not insult them would instead constitute insults to my employers, and therefore to my own bottom line. Everything in this world comes down to the bottom line. My decision to spend a month of my life in spare hospital rooms was no exception, any more than was my agreeing to cover my colleague Luis's shift while he flew to California for a funeral, though both actions admittedly lent themselves to rationalization in light of the fact that I was going to be in the hospital anyway. Fresh off my 24 hours on call, I reflected that the first of the patients on Luis's schedule were lucky, for they would catch me before the real exhaustion set in. But then it struck me, not without a twinge of shame, that this was just another instance of the universal human tendency to attribute good luck to others while reserving pity for oneself, regardless of the actual facts of the situation. They were rather an odd couple, these two patients. He stout and pot-bellied, with black teeth, sallow skin, and a glower that was either sinister or devastatingly morose. She plump, sensuous, and fair, positively slathered in makeup, with an air of barely constrained indignation. They seemed to be immigrants, but not from the same country. My best guess, in his case, was Chinese or Guatemalan, in hers, Italian, or Arab, or perhaps Macedonian. He spoke a growling, monosyllabic English. She said nothing at all, and perhaps understood nothing, but seemed to judge what was said with a towering self-assuredness that transcended even understanding. "We are trying for baby," he explained. Trying, no good." "You've done some blood tests already," I said, peering down at their charts. Whatever hardships I might be enduring, I told myself, I was at least in my own country, fluent, educated. 3 children in 5 years attested unequivocally to my virility, though, once in a blue moon, I did have to stifle the wish that one of us, my wife or even me, could be a little less fertile, for then we might not find ourselves in so much debt so early in our marriage. Still, objectively, I was the lucky one. "We do blood test," the man agreed. For she, no good." "They haven't revealed any problems, you mean?" "Blood test no reveal problem," he said. "But sperm test, that one reveal big problem." "Oh?" The results of the live semen analysis had, to me, suggested no cause for concern. His sperm count was a bit low, but still well within the normal range. Impressive, actually, for a man in his condition, clearly obese, probably overworked, quite possibly undocumented, undoubtedly with ample exposure to pesticides, parabens, phthalates, and heavy metals. Though less than optimal, it shouldn't have been decisively prohibitive to conception, yet he seemed certain that he was to blame. I asked, "What gave you that idea?" "Dr. Luis send us result attachments," he grunted. "I read. Very bad news. I am problem." He hung his head in shame. "Actually," I said gently, "these results are inconclusive. The next thing I'd like to do is order an ultrasound for her." I nodded at his partner. "There are certain hormonal imbalances that won't show up in normal blood tests. One way to catch them—" "I am problem," he repeated, stabbing himself in the chest with one sausage-like finger. "Me. Problem." "We don't know that," I said. Normally, with only 15 minutes per patient, and 10 of those were for the paperwork, I didn't bother to forge emotional connections, but something about this man aroused my sympathies. What had he been through? I wondered. What corrosive subliminal messages had he been absorbing along with the ubiquitous environmental toxins? Why did he look so much older and more decrepit than his partner when they were, in fact, the same age? The clock was ticking, but I couldn't bring myself to send him on his way without having said something comforting. The Agatha Christie novel tucked into my waistline pinched my stomach as I leaned forward. "You're not always the problem. Let's see what the ultrasound has to say." Then the woman spoke. Her English was better than his, if heavily accented. "We've done your tests," she said, "and he is the problem. You're just not reading them correctly." She spoke with such authority that I glanced instinctively back down at the charts, double-checking in case I had missed something. Was she a doctor? Or had she been one in her past life, in her country? Had she seen something I hadn't? "You just know what they taught you in medical school," she declared, "but I wanted real answers, so I gave your test results to ChatGPT, and do you know what it said?" Swiping a dark strand of hair from her eyes, she leaned forward defiantly. "It said he has the weakest sperm in all of human history!" My mouth fell open. "It took him 3 hours of jerking off just to come enough for your stupid little test," she went on. "Your nurse walked in on him 3 times. 3! The first time, she apologized. The second, she shook her head and went away. The last time, she just stood there waiting." To the floor, the man grumbled, "I no want children." "Come on!" She leapt to her feet and seized him by the arm. "This guy doesn't know anything. Chat knows everything on the internet. We don't need that stupid ultrasound." Before another word could be said, they were gone. For a solid minute, I sat in stunned silence, staring at the empty chairs while thoughts tumbled around in my head like old shoes in a dryer. It was true that when compared, not to contemporary averages, but to those of our forebears, of all the men who've ever lived, his sperm count really was quite low, and it was also true that what I knew was mostly what I'd learned in school, plus what little I'd managed to pick up firsthand, and, undeniably, my behavior was constrained by structural incentives, one of which was to keep the patients coming back. Though the same could, of course, be said of any modern medical provider, including ChatGPT, and, perhaps most damning and significant of all, the chatbot had succeeded where I had been failing, making one of them, at least, feel a bit better. But then, noticing that the clock was ticking, and recalling that there were other patients waiting in other rooms, and that a report still needed to be filed, I wheeled my stool squeakily toward the computer, shedding uncomfortable thoughts like defunct skin cells, and, with a conscience sterilized out of auto-Hippocratic necessity, pulled up the portal and put my fingers to the keys.
So, my friend, we all have a friend like this who...
At this point, like pretty much everyone has a friend who trusts ChatGPT or whatever their favorite chatbot is more than any other authority on the planet.
Including themselves.
Which is the sad part.
Yeah, so my friend, and again, her story is sad. For women out there who don't have kids, those who choose not to have kids, it's a different story. But women who don't have kids, whether A, cannot have kids because of health issues, or like in my friend's case, no one knows what's going on, including the doctors, but apparently ChatGPT does. So I remember we were at a residency last year. And she texted me saying, hey, can we chat for a few minutes? And I said, yeah, let's talk in a few hours. So she called me, and she has been trying to have a baby for 5 years. She was married for 3 years, tried with the first husband, nothing. And then the second husband, they have been trying for, now it's been, I think, 6 or 7 years. But she tried everything, even witchcraft. Like nothing worked. And so she used to trust me. She used to trust other people. She has never been the person to trust herself, which again, you can trust others. But if you don't trust yourself, like as I was saying earlier, you end up being like Timothy. But she called me and she said, my husband has the weakest sperm on the planet in all of human history. And I asked her, well, how do you know that? Because I wanted to know. I was curious. And she said, well, ChatGPT told me that. So since then, whenever I have arthritis, if I am having pain and I text her and I said, oh, I'm not feeling well. She all the time, no matter what, she would ask me to ask ChatGPT, to the point where now we cannot talk about things without asking ChatGPT. If we talk about a country and like she wants to go there, but she thinks she doesn't like food or whatever, she would say, well, because ChatGPT says it's the worst food. Or ChatGPT says that a woman can have a kid at the age of 70, or whatever ChatGPT tells her, she believes it. And so that's how this story came about.
Yep. And there's another side to that coin too. I mean, the foundation of all of it is the lack of trust in oneself. But we also wanted to explore why old authorities like medical doctors are losing their credibility. And again, you can't really function effectively in the world if you don't trust your own ability to determine who is worthy of trust. Like that's the first form of trust. You have to be able to trust your own judgment and assess who actually knows more and who just claims to know more. So why is it that to someone who does not trust himself, ChatGPT appears to know more than people who have spent their lives studying and practicing medicine? And the narrator of this story is based on a family friend of ours who is a retired physician. He was not practicing when ChatGPT came on the scene, but he knows a lot of people who still are. He still stays in the loop, and it's really brutal, the position that physicians are in, because even physicians who really and truly want to help their patients and who have the capacity and the knowledge base and the will to help their patients are constrained by the socioeconomic systems that they're operating in, constrained by the business models, constrained by the time pressure, constrained by the financial stresses that they're experiencing in their personal life. So we wanted to work all of this into the story because it's easy to vilify one party, right? It's easy to see that doctors are not practicing medicine as well as they could be and blame the doctors. I don't think it's the fault of a lot of doctors. Sure, you've got doctors who are incompetent, you've got doctors who don't care, but I don't think they account for the majority of, I don't know if malpractice is too strong a word, but I don't think they account for the majority of the poor care that people are getting at the hands of medical establishments. I think there's more to it. So we wanted to pack all of that into as concise a story as possible, and this is what we came up with. Oh, and one last thing, a word on the title. Hippocrates, we all know him as the originator of the Hippocratic Oath, the most famous piece of which is that doctors are obligated to do no harm. And we wanted to explore what that means in the 21st century in a medical industrial system where it's almost impossible not to perpetuate harm because it's part of the business model. If you don't have harm, you don't have people coming back, you don't have customers. So there's a brief allusion to the Hippocratic Oath in the final line, auto-Hippocratic necessity. And the idea that we're exploring is that the Hippocratic Oath is dead, Hippocrates is dead, but has been reanimated in a zombie-like fashion. In that, in this case, the physician finds that the only way in which he can practice this principle of doing no harm is to limit the harm done to himself by the knowledge of the inefficacy of the system that he's part of. And he has to dull his senses to that in any way he can, even though, of course, he's fully aware of the failures of that system. And he's fully aware that if the system were serving patients adequately, there probably would be fewer, perhaps not none, fewer people turning to ChatGPT and other quote solutions that are also likely to end up doing harm in the long run. And the only thing he can do about that is to try to put it out of his mind, because no matter how much he thinks about it, no matter how much he meditates on it, no matter how much he dwells on it, he is still stuck in the role that he's in, still under the pressures he's under, still confined by the constraints that structure his profession. And there's only one channel left available to him to practice the principle of doing no harm, and it's on himself.
We hope you enjoy. Stay tuned, more coming soon.